And he gathers this ragtag group of guys that become known as his mighty men. His mighty men, who he is training for battle and are going to become his elite guard and eventually his army. So he had a natural and a supernatural leadership gift that God had blessed him with. His heart was open and transparent before God and men. So it seems that everything David is doing is pleasing to both God and man. So it should be no surprise at the amount of support this guy had. So in 1 Chronicles chapter 11, we're going to pick up in verse 4 where it says this: David and all the Israelites marched to Jerusalem, that is Jebus. The Jebusites who lived there said to David, "You will not get in here." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is now known as the city of David. David had said, "Whoever leads the attack on the Jebusites will become commander-in-chief." Joab, son of Zeruiah, went up first, and so he received the command. So David's like, all right, we're going to let you guys compete for it. You're going to see who is the best warrior out there, and the one it is gets to be the commander of my army. Wow. American Ninja Warrior, except Jerusalem Ninja Warrior, right? Okay, who can make it through the gauntlet? Who can scale the wall? Who can get over there? Who can defeat the enemy? Verse 7. David then took up residence in the fortress, and so it was called the City of David. He built up the city around it, from the terraces to the surrounding wall, while Joab restored the rest of the city. And David became more and more powerful because the Lord Almighty was with him. Verse 10, "And these were the chiefs of David's mighty warriors. They, together with all Israel, gave his kingship strong support to extend it over the whole land as the Lord had promised. This is the list of David's mighty warriors. Jashobeam, a Hakmonite, was the chief of the officers. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed in one encounter. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Dodai the Ahohite, one of the 3 mighty warriors. He was with David at Pas-dammim when the Philistines gathered there for battle. At a place where there was a field full of barley, the troops fled from the Philistines. But they took their stand in the middle of the field. They defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. 3 of the 30 chiefs came down to David to the rock at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out to the Lord. "God forbid that I should do this," he said. "Should I drink the blood of these men who went at the risk of their lives?" Because they risked their lives to bring it back, David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the 3 mighty warriors. Abishai, the brother of Jacob, was the chief of the 3. He raised his spear against 300 men whom he killed, and so he became as famous as the 3. He was doubly honored above the 3 and became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, performed great exploits. He struck down Moab's 2 mightiest warriors. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down an Egyptian who was 5 cubits tall. Although the Egyptian had a spear like a weaver's rod in his hand, Benaiah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He too was as famous as the 3 mighty warriors. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30, that he was not included among the 3. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. So let's think about this. This sounds like something out of a DC superhero movie or comic or something like this, but this really happened. David gathered these people, and if you look at how he gathered them, these were not the most eloquent, these were not the most highly regarded people. Many of them only came to him because they were criminals and they were trying to pay off their debt so they wouldn't have to go to jail, or they were indebted for some other reason, and they basically needed to kind of raid these Philistine camps, take all the money from them so they could pay their debts off. okay? So he started with some pretty rowdy guys, right? Now, if you've worked with these kind of strong-will, type A, get it done, I don't care, no ethics about it, we're just going to get it done, they can be hard to manage, right? And yet David somehow found a way to pull these guys together and help them to work together in ways, and still were able to let the cream rise to the top, to let the ones who were the most skilled, the most brave, the most courageous, go ahead and get lifted up and get promoted in his army. So he created a system as a leader by which people who otherwise would have just been the scum of society now had become an elite army. There was his personal bodyguard that was building into the army that was going to continue to take over the land that Joshua had started taking over but had not finished. So now here we are, these exploits, these men who would do these incredible things, show incredible strength and skill and bravery. This guy Joab became the commander-in-chief of David's army just by scaling a wall and going over and taking the first group of them. Jashobeam, who one person killed 300 men in one encounter. Eleazar, who wouldn't back down when the other men fled. Just a bulldog tenacity. 3 of the 30 chiefs broke through the enemy lines just to get David a drink of water because they overheard him saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice to get some water here?" So they broke through the enemy lines, got him some water, brought him back, and David's like, "You risk your life just because I can have a small wish? I can't even drink this. This is the life of my men here." He poured it out on the ground. I don't know, I might have been insulted at that. But David showed such a concern for their welfare, so much protection over the people who were protecting him, that they just loved him more and more. They became more and more devoted to him. Another guy, Abishai, killed 300 men in one encounter. Benaiah, on a snowy pit, killed a lion and a 7.5-foot Egyptian and killed him with the Egyptian's own spear. Who does that remind you of? David. David did something similar to that when he killed Goliath, right? Used the giant's own sword to kill him after he knocked him out, knocked him down with the stone that he slung. All of this happened between the time David was anointed king and the time he actually became king. This was the beginning of an awesome team of the faithful who were ready to do God's bidding at any time and had that esprit de corps. It seemed that nothing could stop this military force. The Bible even says that David's army was getting stronger and stronger, and Saul's army was getting weaker and weaker the whole time these things were happening. And we see, because of Saul's sin, the Spirit of God begin to leave Saul. And we see it more and more prominent in David as he approaches the time when he is going to be made king over Israel. And remember, this is before the divided kingdom. So all of the tribes were intact. Everybody was working together at this point. And even though Saul was beginning to reject God in ways through disobedience and losing the Spirit of God, God's people were still making progress because of what David was doing before he ever got the title. And that's something I've noticed about leaders. True leaders, good leaders, people who are really serious about leading, they don't wait until they get a title to lead. They just have it in them. They want to do something that's going to rally the troops, so to speak. Someone who's going to bring people together, who's going to raise up other leaders. And the best leader is not the one who sits alone at the top and commands everyone else. A true leader is one who builds up other leaders. One who says, I want you to be the best you can be. I want you to overcome your deficits. And I want to see you get some courage in your heart. And I want to see you live for God. And I want to see you do great things for God. Whatever God's will is. Now back then, at that time, in that point in history, it was battle. It was physical battle, right? Today, it's that battle within. It's that battle for territory, first of all, to make sure we're loving God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind. I love the men in this congregation. Of course, I love the women and children too. But just to brag on the men for a minute, since it's Father's Day. This group of guys that meet every other Saturday going through a very, very difficult and trying workbook called Heart Transformation for Kingdom Living. Listen, this workbook is tough, okay? It makes us go in and dig deep. It's requiring. It's time consuming. But what we're beginning to see is hearts change We're beginning to see people who are clearing out those parts of our hearts that aren't fully devoted to God. Sometimes that heart of shame, or that heart of division, or that heart of guilt, or that heart that's in some way wants to be totally devoted to God, but has something holding it back. And I encourage anybody to go through that book, but put a warning label on it. Not easy, very time consuming, but well worth the effort. So, note how David inspired bravery and rewarded it with promotion. Joab, who had already been leading David's army, has now secured his position by leading the attack on the Jebusites. This area was going to be called the City of David from then on. And even as we go into the New Testament, we still see this area called the City of David. So what inspires this kind of bravery? It was a God-fearing leader through whom people see the Spirit of God working. But David didn't stop with leading leaders. He also inspired teamwork. I think that's how he made his biggest difference. As long as that kingdom was united, and as long as these mighty men were on task, on course, doing what they had been called to do, nobody could defeat them. It was so obvious that God was with them. In some ways, it's almost easier to lead a team when there's only one true leader among them. But David had a litany of mavericks among him, each one of them potentially capable of leading their own small army. Yet he managed to keep them unified. Now that's what a true leader of leaders will do. And I pray that God will raise up more leaders in his kingdom. I pray that God will raise up people who are leaders of leaders to help them do what it is that God's called them to do, to inspire bravery and courage inside of them, to help them not only have a good heart that checks its own motives, but build skills in the kingdom of God to actually be a difference maker to the point that people's lives change. You know, they say only God can make a Christian, and it's true. Because of his grace, he does. But he calls us to make disciples. He calls us to be the ones to help train each other, equip each other. In fact, in Ephesians 4, it says it was he who gave some to be, and he lists off this list of roles in the church, right? The pastors and prophets and teachers and evangelists and all these people. Why? To equip God's people for works of service. And I want to tell you, before this summer's over, I want to do some equipping in this church. I want us to have not just good hearts. I look out at this group, I think every one of you have good hearts. I know every one of you. I don't doubt any one of your sincerity. I don't think there's a hypocrite among us, okay? But I want to see us build skills. I want to see us be difference makers, be disciple makers, be ones who can enter into people's life and help take them from that next step to that next step to that next step, so that you multiply yourself. And Jesus has many, many followers in his